Hello, welcome to our webinar entitled Faith, Food, Soil, and Climate. I am your host, Carla Stoltzfus-Detweiler, Climate Justice Coordinator for Mennonite Church USA. And this webinar is the third in our four-part series on climate justice as part of our Learn, Pray, Join Climate Justice Seeking Shalom initiative. As Christians, we recognize that food is a gift from God and that we are called to share food with the hungry. In Matthew 25, Jesus says that when we feed hungry neighbors, we're feeding him. And in this era of concern for our climate, we recognize that how we grow food, how we tend the soil, and the choices we make about food have a tremendous impact on the health, not only of human bodies, but also the health of our planet. So today we want to consider together, how can our practices of growing, eating, and sharing food not only fill empty stomachs, but also nurture health for ourselves, our communities, and our climate. And so here to consider that question with us today, we are honored to have four panelists who are passionate about growing and cooking and sharing food in ways that nurture health for people and planet. And so I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have Elena Gingrich with us. Elena grows a variety of trees, including chestnut trees, on her grandmother's property in Southeast Iowa. And Elena is helping her community think in new ways about how to grow food and care for farmland. So welcome, Elena, and your daughter, who is with us today. Heather Wolf is joining us from Taftsville, Vermont, where she works as a dietitian and health coach. Heather also serves as Creation Care Liaison for Taftsville Chapel Mennonite Fellowship, and she hosts a monthly Wild Church gathering. Heather is co-author of the cookbook Sustainable Kitchen, which was published by Herald Press in 2020. And she also authors a column for Anabaptist World called Faithful Eating and Living. Welcome, Heather. Levi Geyer is joining us from Iowa County, Iowa. He is the owner of Fancy Twig Farm, a small business that produces hickory nut oil. Levi is a 2022 graduate of Eastern Mennonite University, where he studied environmental science. Welcome, Levi. And finally, Eugene Kim joins us from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Eugene co-leads a food justice project through the Global Shapers Lancaster Hub. And she's a communications associate for Mennonite Central Committee East Coast and a graduate of Goshen College, where she studied sustainable food systems and graphic design. Welcome, Eugene. We're also joined today by Lorraine Stutzman-Amstutz. She is Mennonite Church USA's denominational minister for peace and justice. So grateful to all of you for joining us for this webinar today. And I'm so grateful to all of the participants who are on the call with us. I'd like to invite those of you who have joined us for the webinar to introduce yourselves as well using the chat. If you'd like, you can share your name. If you want to acknowledge the indigenous peoples on whose homes you live, you can tell us that, or a more conventional name for your homeland where you live. And just for fun, you can tell us your favorite tree food. So I'll give an example. I'm Carla. I live on the homelands of the Muskogee, Sauk, and Ioways people in a place that is known as Kelowna, Iowa now. And I'll just have to say my favorite tree food is the apple, the wonderful, versatile apple. So if you want to share that, introduce yourselves in the chat, we welcome you to do that. Today's gathering is in webinar format, so all attendees are muted, but the chat is enabled. We'll be posting some links in the chat. Crystal has already placed a few there that you can follow if you choose. Spanish interpretation is available. You may see a globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you may need to click the More button to see the globe for interpretations. We welcome your questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end. Feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for questions. Only panelists will be able to see your questions. And at the end of the webinar, we will also answer some of your pre-submitted questions as time allows. Lorraine, would you lead us in an opening prayer, please?
Yes. Thank you all for being here. Let's pray together. God, we ask for your continued guidance as we cultivate the earth to ensure that we are rooted in care for the land and for all people. May we share the fruits of our labor with compassion for both. Grant us the wisdom to steward our planet with love and care and reverence, embracing practices that honor the delicate balance of nature. May our efforts in growing, cooking, and sharing food be a testament to our commitment to climate justice as we nurture the land that is a living and breathing part of us. May we learn to tread lightly, leaving a legacy of abundance and compassion for future generations. Amen.
Thank you, Lorraine. So let's dive in with our panelists. Our first question is, what do breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe we should add snacks have to do with faith, and what do they have to do with climate? And I'm wondering, Yujin, would you be willing to lead us off?
Yes. Yeah, so sharing a meal has always been an expression of faith and a sacred and intimate space to build fellowship in my personal and communal life. So, for example, growing up, my family would always gather for a meal, and at dinner, we take turns saying a prayer. So it's a moment to pause and reconnect with the people around me and express gratitude to God and each other. Another memorable family tradition with food and faith is when my family has guests, we would often cook bibimbap, which is a Korean dish. Bibim means mixing and pop is cooked rice. So it's a dish served as a bowl of warm white rice topped with namu, which is seasoned herbs, and gochujang, a spicy red pepper paste with fried egg on top. So it's stirred together just before eating. It's a very interactive and inviting dish that makes the fellowship around the table more fun and special. And I think food and community are essential to the Mennonite tradition and faith. But with climate change, I think the food system is a major contributor to that, and modern agricultural revolutions such as farm mechanization, the Green Revolution, which is more of an oil revolution that adapted and normalized the use of fossil fuels, and the byproducts such as monocultures, chemicals, fertilizers, they were all a drastic change, which reduced family and local autonomy and affected the well-being, health, and for like billions of people and our relationship with the ecosystem. So each step of food's journey, from being grown, processed, transported, distributed, consumed, and disposed of, that they all create greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts of climate change. It disrupts access to food and the quality and availability of food, especially in marginalized and vulnerable communities that are already experiencing the impacts of climate change.
Thank you, Eugen. I'd love to try the dish that you described. Levi, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, I think as Mennonites, we've always been very conscious of how what we consume is impacting others. You can see evidence of this in the More with Less cookbook that was published in 1976. The book talks about overconsumption in the US and how that creates scarcity in less wealthy countries. So even before climate change was an issue, we have been conscious of how our lifestyle impacts others. The climate crisis is kind of just another iteration of the same concept.
Thank you, Levi. Heather, how would you describe the connections between our food, faith, and climate?
Mm. Well, we all eat every day, most days, and there's so many decisions throughout the day that we are making, and I see each one as this opportunity to make a value-based decision. So I like to think about how my personal food choices align with what's most important to me. And so two core values that I hold are faith and environment. And those two values can be reflected and lived out by the choices I put on my plate. So, for example, eating a lentil burger, I'm choosing in that to feed the hungry, right? Because eating plant-based diet can feed more people than when we feed plants to animals and then eat the animals. It's less efficient. We can feed less people. So my lentil burger becomes this act of food justice in action. Being mindful of breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, impacting others includes environment and helps me to have integrity, which I think about as kind of this honest living, guided by values, feeling whole. And in my professional realm as a dietitian and a wellness coach, professionally, I see a lot of dis-ease when people are living out of alignment with their values. So from a faith perspective, I think about my body as a temple and the natural world around me as God's sanctuary. It's a sacred space where God dwells, where I worship God. And we know food greatly impacts both the body's wellness and the body of Earth. So being attentive to what we eat matters for our own health individually and as a community and as a world.
Thank you, Heather. Elena, what would you like to add? What are the connections you see between faith, food, and climate?
We're still on the breakfast, lunch, and dinner question. God gives us so much all the time, always. Mealtime is a good time, 3 times a day or more or less, to sit down either alone or with others and to take time to be thankful for what you have to eat and everything that God has given you. And I kind of skipped the climate change part on this question.
That's all right. You've all done a wonderful job of helping us see connections between our faith, our values, and our food practices. like to move to our second question, which is what makes food sustainable? Or if you want to use a different term, what makes food regenerative? You can choose, our panelists can choose which term you'd like to use. And then what factors do you weigh in choosing sustainable or regenerative foods? Levi, would you start us off with this question?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I studied environmental science at Eastern Mennonite University, and one of the things that we learned there was that there are three pillars to sustainability: environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Or you could say people, planet, profit. In the scientific discussions on food and climate change, I think the social aspect can get overlooked. How often do we think about who produces our food? Here in the United States, if you buy fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, many of these are grown by underpaid, undocumented immigrant labor. And there's also a lot of food in the United States that is produced by prison labor, which, in my opinion, is basically slavery. Another way we can think about social sustainability is by looking at demographic trends. In 1800, about 90% of Americans lived on a farm. By 1900, that was only 40%. Today, it's less than 2%. I think that's moving in the wrong direction. I think the more people that live with a close relationship to land, the better. And I think it's important to note that this decline from 90% living on farms to just 2% was only made possible by fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have replaced human and animal labor throughout the system. It's a big problem because burning fossil fuels is the primary cause of climate change. It's also a problem because fossil fuels are non-renewable. At the rate we're currently burning through them, oil and natural gas will run out in 50 years or less. And so far, we haven't shown the ability to slow down our consumption. 50 years is not much time. If we want to build a sustainable food system, we need to renew our ability to produce food with primarily human and animal labor. That means we need a lot more farmers, and fast. What gives me hope is that the statistics here don't include a lot of people who grow food. A lot more than 2% of the population has experience with gardening or caring for animals or growing trees. And I doubt that statistic counts all the undocumented immigrants and prisoners who have food growing experience.
Thank you, Levi, for making those connections between sustainable food and social justice for us. Heather, would you want to respond?
Yeah, the word sustainable is one I've become more familiar with since writing a cookbook called Sustainable Kitchen. And thank you for putting that link in the chat if you want to look at that more. It's in the line of more with less, that thinking about food and faith in a vegetarian cookbook. It was Herald Press's first vegetarian cookbook. And so when I think about that word sustainability in the title, I imagine, right, it meaning like the ability to keep going, right? How do we feed ourselves in a way that doesn't deplete resources? Right? How do I consume mindfully in a way that also is attentive to giving back, right? So that life can continue, right? This idea of reciprocity feels important, not simply consuming and extracting. So regenerative, I think, adds to naming the truth that in many ways we have damaged and degraded our soils and our environment and our water and our air. And those need restorative practices, not just sustainable practices. So your question around when evaluating sustainable choices, what do we think about? And I really love to think about every recipe that I create and I cook as an edible story. So I challenge you the next time you pick up any recipe to get curious about each ingredient listed. Where is it from? How resource intensive is it to grow? Right? Considering things like how much water, land, fossil fuel inputs were required to grow that. How is it packaged? How far was it transported? Okay. So when we get to know the story of ingredients and in food, it then allows me also to make an informed decision based on my values. And the column that I wrote for Anabaptist World in April talked about the story of the almonds grown out in California. So I would encourage you, if you're want to get curious more about edible stories, to go look that up. And it just, it really is expansive when you start to get curious. Sustainability to me also means less reliance on a linear food economy, right? Which most of us depend on these days, right? With industrial agriculture, right? Someone else grows the food, lots of middle people packing, processing, transporting, selling before it gets to the consumer, right? And there are points of breakdown in that chain. We can move to more of a circular, local-based economy. That feels more sustainable. Okay? That to me mimics nature more. And there is a lot of wisdom in God's natural world. This idea of biomimicry, right? If I can grow my food or it's grown nearby by farmers, consumption, composting back to healthy soils, growing local foods, closed loop systems, resources aren't lost. It makes more sense from a sustainability and regenerative standpoint.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the invitation to consider the stories of our food, the edible stories. Eugen, what are your reflections on what makes food sustainable and what are the factors we weigh in choosing sustainable food?
Yeah, so food is very central to everyone's lives as we all need food to survive and thrive. But our current food system is destabilizing our planet, and access to food is not equitable globally and within communities. So, for example, more than 47,000 individuals in Lancaster County live in food insecure households, and children are more likely to be food insecure than adults, and individuals of color are more likely to experience food insecurity than their white neighbors. And also, millions of people are experiencing high levels of acute hunger globally. So yeah, that's something I think about when we think of sustainable food. Like, how do we ensure food is life-sustaining for everyone while making food sustainable? And basing a food production on fossil fuels, which is something finite and temporary, obviously brings problems. So I think we need to approach the question of how to make food sustainable while it's life sustaining, approach it from a holistic view and from bottom up. So from farmers, indigenous communities, communities of color, low-income communities, immigrant communities, and so individuals most impacted by this finite and unsustainable food system, we're all participating in. So what makes food sustainable and regenerative, I think, is the relationships between people and the land, and between food providers and those who eat. So like Heather mentioned, knowing the journey of the food, the story of food, such as where the food is grown, how they're grown and by whom, they're all factors to consider. And also sourcing food from your local area is another approach. So as we're all consumers, we can all contribute to sustainable food systems by controlling what we eat and where we get it from. I think through how we spend our money as well. So if we start supporting local food systems that are producing ecologically healthy food, then I think that adds up and can become the new norm.
Thank you, Eugen. And Elena, how would you describe what makes food sustainable or regenerative? And what are some principles that guide you in your food choices?
I think both the words sustainable and regenerative are so loose and like they're broad terms, and there's no catch-all solution that applies to every person and every location. When I think of the word regenerative, I think of that while I'm growing food, I'm also growing something else. So, for example, I grow Chinese chestnuts on my farm. Because with Chinese chestnuts, I am growing a tree and I'm also growing food at the same time. So every year the tree gets bigger and it also has the potential to make food. I'm also providing habitat for birds and wildlife. The spare chestnuts feed other wildlife. And growing chestnuts, farming chestnuts allows space for other plants, so biodiversity, other animals, and other human activities in the same acreage. So I'm able to develop community relationships. I make hay from in between the chestnuts and graze and produce grass-finished beef. And then I have friends and neighbors plant vegetables out in my chestnut groves. I just had a friend add some honeybee hives this spring, and chestnuts are really similar to corn in their composition. They're primarily a carbohydrate, but they're very different from corn in that they don't require yearly tillage. And they don't have to be replanted every year. And then the leaves and the burrs drop onto the ground, stay on the ground, everything goes back into the soil. And at the same time, the tree is like holding onto a lot of carbon. Do I think growing chestnuts in Iowa can be like financially and physically sustainable for me even and for other people? I don't know, but like I'm in the experiment stage of that and hope to be an example for other people.
Thank you, Elena. I hear so much resonance among what you're each saying. You're talking about growing relationships, and Eugen talked about relationships. There's so much resonance there. I just want to also offer that if anyone is interested in learning more about the regenerative agriculture movement, there's a book I would recommend, Dirt to Soil, One Family's Journey Toward Regenerative Agriculture by Gabe Brown. And I believe Crystal will put that in the chat if you'd like to learn more about that. And then Elena had a great segue for us into our next question, which is, how are you each tending the soil? and contributing to ecosystem health in your context. You each have different ways that you're doing this. Elena described how she is growing trees and how that contributes to biodiversity where she lives. What are others of you doing to tend the soil? Heather, would you start us off?
Sure. I describe myself as passionate from everything from plot to plate. So I love to have my hands in the dirt, growing, gardening, cooking, eating, composting, like the whole loop. So I am a volunteer certified Vermont master composter, and in my state help to do education around composting, which is mandatory. It is the law in the state of Vermont. And I also know that composting, which is fabulous for soil health and adding organic material, is also a result of food scraps, of food waste. So I first work on helping educate people to minimize the amount of food waste that we have, because when we look at Project Drawdown, which looked at ways that we can decrease carbon and draw that down, food waste reduction came out as one of the top 5 things that we can do. And also on the top 5 list was move towards a plant-based diet. So 2 of like the top 5 solutions had to do with food and agriculture. So at home, I have a homestead where we try to grow a lot of our own food. I cold compost, and I have help from my chickens. So I love the interconnection between how the chickens help me turn my pile, and I get amazing eggs, and they poop so efficiently. Their microbiomes are digesting those food scraps so fast and so efficient. So I really like having a holistic approach on the homestead. And something that has stuck with me since my master composter training was this idea. They told us that as composters, we are farming microorganisms. We're not just recycling food scraps. What we're actually doing is farming microorganisms, creating hospitality for all the bacteria and the decomposers to do their work of turning organic matter right into this healthy additive for soil. So I know as a gardener, right, that the first thing I have to do in order to have healthy plants is to have healthy soil. So I need to first attend to my soil health, and then my plants will be healthier, more productive, right, more resilient to disease and pests. I see it as an investment, right, that pays dividends when we invest in soil. So some ways that I invest are regularly testing my soil, sending samples to the university extension services for a small fee, and getting to know what is the pH, what are the nutrient values. Based on those results, then I can amend. And so, for example, I just this weekend added some sulfur to my blueberries that like a more acidic soil. And so I lowered the pH with adding a little sulfur. Another investment I have made is in no-till and using permaculture principles, such as that Elena talked about this diversity, right? Just not a monocrop of one straight row of things. I will interplant flowers and herbs into my vegetables, and I have guilds around all my apple trees with a diversity of companion plants. To me, diversity is synonymous with health in the garden space. So that deep taproot of the dandelion, right? It's mining minerals way down and bringing them up to the soil surface, making them available to other plants nearby. And I would say another biomimicry thing that I try to do is leave no bare soil. If you look at nature, it covers the ground, right? We don't naturally see disturbed soil. So if I have an empty garden row, how do I plant a cover crop as an example of biomimicry?
Thank you, Heather, for sharing all of those practical examples of how to tend soil. Eugen, would you tell us what is it like to tend soil? You're in an urban setting. What does tending the soil look like in your setting?
Yeah, it's very different. I have a tiny garden in my backyard, and I'm not an expert in farming or soil management gardening by any means. However, I'm finding my way to build this resilient food and ecosystem with my community in Lancaster. So I'm part of Global Shapers Lancaster Hub, and Global Shapers is a global network of young people who are passionate about making a difference in their communities. So with this, as a part of the hub, I began co-leading a food justice project this year. And the goal of this project is to strengthen the local food system through partnerships, create space for learning and reconnecting with the soil, and celebrate food cultures and diversity represented in our community. So as part of this project, we partner with Lancaster Compost Co-ops to invite more residents to participate in their compost orientation and workday. And Lancaster Compost Co-ops, it's a volunteer-led initiative that enables community residents to divert and reduce food waste, create high-quality compost, and build community. So it's a great initiative to connect with fellow composters in the community, and we get to take home finished compost and amend our soil at home. So yeah, that's an exciting part. And another part of the project that is developing is our partnership with the Penn State Extension Master Gardener Program. Master gardeners volunteer to educate the public and community members on best practices in sustainable horticulture and environmental stewardship. So we're working with them to hold workshops on community gardens and urban gardening. And we're in the process of developing a community garden map that locates and provides information on all the active community gardens in Lancaster County. And we're also planning to visit these gardens and collect oral history and stories from our fellow community gardeners. So through this project, I learned that there are already many organizations who are addressing these issues in ecosystem health and soil health, and passionate about cultivating resilience in the soil and also in community. So I think it's important to find these linkages, build solidarity among local communities and organizations to regenerate soil and contribute to the ecosystem health, which also restores health, relationships, creativity, and so much more in communities.
you, Eugen. And Levi, you bring another perspective with your foraging of hickory nuts. Can you tell us how you are tending ecosystem health with your activities?
Yeah, so I have started thinking about this differently now that I'm starting with an already intact ecosystem. Previously, I had imagined that I would start farming with a cornfield, so a broad area that doesn't have anything on it and has already been somewhat degraded. But I ended up finding out about hickory oil, and the hickory trees I harvest already exist in the forests around where I live. So I have to go into these forests, these semi-natural ecosystems, and decide how I'm going to interact with them to best produce the hickory oil. Um, and I do need to make changes. To be able to harvest nuts efficiently, I have to clear some of the brush and some of the downed limbs underneath the trees. And if I want each tree to produce the most nuts that it can, it might be helpful for me to even kill and cut down some of the trees that are competing with the hickory trees for sunlight. But I have to be careful when I go in and alter the ecosystem not to damage and degrade what's there. For the most part, everything is there for a reason. There are other farmers that I know that will cut down the basswood in their timber because they see it as a trashy tree. But the basswood is important for pollinators. So a rule that I've made for myself that I try to follow whenever I can is to not remove a species unless I know what that species is and why it's there. So I'm going to be trying a few different management strategies in the different forests near me. I'm going to be manually removing invasive species like honeysuckle or multiflora rose. I'm going to be mowing under some of the locations that are less ecologically sensitive. I'm going to try burning some of the forests where I have the permission to do that, and I'll be grazing under some of the trees to see how that affects the ecosystem. And for each of these strategies, I'll watch how it changes from what it was and evaluate whether my impact has been beneficial to the forest or whether it's been detrimental to the forest. And my goal is to always leave the forest better than when I found it. And that's exciting to me that that's possible. I think a lot of times the conversation is framed as how do we balance food production with nature and natural spaces, or do we have enough land for agriculture, or is our agricultural land going to destroy, the rainforest? But what I hope to show is that you can have both at the same time. You can have an ecologically diverse forest that is also producing food. And this, I think, is how Native American peoples understood and their relationship with the landscape as well.
Thank you. And all of your responses are pointing me to the next question, because I hear hope in what you're saying, and this question is about hope. We're also talking about nourishing our bodies. Hope is what nourishes our souls, right? So would you share with us what gives you hope? What nourishes your soul as you are growing, preparing, sharing food? And Elena, would you start us off?
What brings me hope is just plants growing at all. As a farmer, I recognize that I don't actually grow plants. I'm not doing photosynthesis. I just move things around. So like where I think they should go. And then like God and cell division and photosynthesis are growing. So I feel hope when I put something in what I think is the right spot and it seems to thrive.
Thank you, Elena. Heather, what feeds your soul? What gives you hope?
Love. I see food as this love and God's care for us, God's love for us in every bite we eat and every plant we tend. It feels so lavish. That the garden, that the earth, nature gives us all the diversity of seed bearing and fruit producing plants for food. So when I remember that food is a gift, when I pause to say, wow, thanks, that's when I feel nourished, body and soul, as you referenced. And I think love flows in all directions, right? Food is also a way that I love God back, right? By honoring the vocation given to humans in the Garden of Eden, right? To tend that was created good, to be stewards. I find such satisfaction, meaning, purpose in growing, gathering, preparing, serving, eating food, especially when done mindfully and in ways that honor creation. It's also a way that I can live out daily love of neighbor. And when I think about neighbor, I think about all creation, human and more than human, local and global. Right? I am nourished body and soul by the food, right? When I'm in touch with it physically, when I'm remembering its edible story, when gratitude is welling up, when there's that humble recognition of interdependence in the web of life, so that kind of slowing down and appreciating and remembering it's a gift. And like Elena said, that so much of it is not my doing. I am merely a steward. That also gives me hope.
Thank you. Levi, what gives you hope?
I know in the past I've had a lot of climate anxiety and grief over what's happening to the earth and what's happening to the land in my state. Especially, Iowa's the most altered state in the United States. 99% of the native landscape here is gone. It's really, really sad. But I think that sadness is important to feel. I think the emotions are there to guide us, and that the grief and anxiety I have experienced have also helped motivate me to work towards change. So I know this this isn't as focused on hope as the question has intended, but even the negative emotions have helped me to get to where I'm at now. And where I'm at now, I'm a lot healthier. Now that I'm focused on doing the work, the energy is flowing better and my mental health is better.
Yeah, thank you, Levi. And hope that ignores grief and that avoids lament. It is is not a sustainable hope. So thank you for naming the important role of grief and lament in our journey toward climate justice. And Eugen, what nourishes your hope?
Yeah. So as I go about my day and I'm in my own little circle, there are times that I forget that I can go outside and touch the soil. And by touching the soil, tending the lettuce, spinach, tomatoes, cucumbers that are growing in my humble garden, and literally touching grass and some plants, these simple acts make me feel reconnected to the land, and that feeds my soul, and it will eventually feed my stomach. As Rachel Carson said, wonder is a virtue, and it is learning again to use your eyes, ears, nostrils, and fingertips, opening up the disused channels of sensory impression. And I think it's important to ask ourselves, how do we stay curious? How do we open up and strengthen our senses to be in awe and wonder in God's creation? Opening up our senses and simply appreciating what's around, beneath, and above us, I think are the first steps to dismantle this disconnect and alienation from the natural world. Because nature is there to support us, nourish us, whether it be fruit trees, raspberry bushes, flowers, parks, vegetables that we grow. And I think we've become disconnected from that. So once we engage with growing food or simply experiencing nature, I think you recognize that we're not really separate from each other. And that helps us realize that food doesn't only feed our stomachs, but also our souls.
Thank you. I recognize that we're getting close to the hour, and we have some questions from the audience that we might want to get to. I just wanted to open it up to our panelists. If there were further comments, things that you were hoping to say, maybe about your community, and the joy and strength of your community that comes from food, before we turn to the questions. So yeah, I want to open it up for that. If any panelist would like to share with us, what is it that gives your community strength or joy, and in the sharing of food? And I'll just let you, popcorn style, who would like to respond?
Well, food is such a social connector, right? So much of our social interactions are in community with food, and even communion, the act of breaking bread and sharing wine together, is a really important part of our faith tradition. And in my wild church gathering, the fellowship table is really important to share food together that's hyper local, and to honor food as part of a faith community, and saying, like, yesterday at our gathering, we had dandelion root tea, and we had rhubarb salsa, and just kind of eating off of the land and really appreciating. There's so much joy when you're connected in that way. And using Robin Wall Kimmerer's honorable harvest principles in community, when we're doing that, right, to ask permission and give gratitude and reciprocity and share with others, has been really a helpful principle to bring into the faith community at church, as we think about food and sharing food together. And I guess I'll end with this beautiful quote from Thomas Berry that says, "The natural world is the sacred community to which we belong. To damage this community is to diminish our own existence." And so I see Jesus in that, right? Jesus coming so that we can have life and life abundantly, to love God and love neighbor. And food is a way that we can daily choose to say yes to life and to love as disciples of Christ.
Thank you for that beautiful connection to our faith and the strength that sharing bread, food gives us in community. Other of our panelists, would you like to speak to what is it that gives strength? What is it about growing and sharing food that strengthens your community? What gives you joy, or just any final comments that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I resonate with what Heather shared. I think food is it offers a very intimate space between not only people and the environment, but also between people. And by cooking, eating together, that allows us to connect with intimate parts of our identity, culture, and faith. Like the bibimbap I share with my family and I share, and the more bibimbap I share, the more it connects me to the community. And so, yeah, I think we need to kind of step away from that transactional relationship that tends to dominate how we act in the world and build this community. And community ultimately brings hope, and it can also create this web of interbeing, recognizing that we are relationships and my well-being is connected to your well-being and to the well-being of people across the world and every God's creation.
Yes, food is a great connector of all those parts of our lives of creation. Levi or Elena, would you like to respond?
I think the others did a really good job of saying this, but yeah, my summarized version would be that being a farmer is pretty good for you. You get to be outside, you get to be working with your body, and you get to be eating healthy food. So if, as we hopefully move to a world where there are more people with a closer relationship with the land, we can be healthier.
Thank you. Lena, would you like to share some final reflections?
I just always get worried with conversations about climate change, and especially for Mennonites, a lot of us are farmers, and there's just like a lot of different farming practices. And I think it's really important that we don't think that we know the answers or the solutions, and that we don't judge each other and find conflict with each other in like land use or climate change issues. Just do what you think is best, and I think that is like important for both the community, for us. Find solutions, share them with others, don't judge what other people are doing.
Yes, thank you. Recognizing the power of community as we discern and hold one another with grace, because we are on this journey together of seeking healing, seeking shalom for our bodies, for all of creation. Thank you so much, Levi, Eugen, Elena, and Heather, for the rich insights that you have brought to us today. Lorraine, I'm going to let you say a few words if you want to summarize about, are there further questions that we should lift up, or have we answered them all?
I think, yeah, in the interest of time, I think there were a number of the questions that came in, I think have been answered by all of you. I think some people are asking, what they can do on their own, or how do they know what to what to plant so that they nourish the soil. And I think some of those questions, obviously, it's going to depend on where they live. But I think you've answered that by encouraging people to find out what steps they can take. Looking at their, local area and what's provided through, you talked about master gardeners, master composters, you talked about the co-ops that are available. And so I think some of those, again, you already answered that people have asked. So I think if there are still questions that come in, I think people can, or that people have now, maybe can send those to Carla. And Carla, maybe you can ask panelists if they want to respond, or you can respond. I think what you've all spoken to has been so helpful and meaningful, and really has spoken to what people, I think, what they came to hear and what they needed to hear. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Lorraine. And again, thank you so much to each of our panelists for your sharing from your experience, your diverse experiences, sharing your wisdom and your passion and your grace with us. And thank you to all who have joined us on this call today. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your questions. Do want to remind you that this webinar will be available for viewing and sharing with others. We'll put the link up on the MCUSA Learn, Pray, Join Climate Justice website in a few days. That will be available. And also for the latest news and events from Mennonite Church USA, including updates on climate justice resources, be sure to subscribe to Piecemeal, MCUSA's weekly e-newsletter. And we have one more webinar in our Climate Justice Seeking Shalom series entitled Energy Efficiency and Faithful Action. That will be on May 30 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll have some panelists talking about how to make our homes and facilities more energy efficient. So we'll have Amy Huser from Camp Friedenswald, Nelson Kilmer, who helped put up a solar array at Heston Mennonite Church, and Eric Sauter, the founder of Regional, a nonprofit organization catalyzing climate solutions in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So consider joining us for that webinar on May 30. And you can find recordings for all of our webinars on that Climate Justice Seeking Shalom website. And if you appreciated this webinar today and would like to support the Climate Justice Ministry of Mennonite Church USA, please consider giving a financial gift. You can make a donation designated for the Climate Justice Ministry on MCUSA's giving page. And we thank you so much for your support. Deep gratitude, blessings of hope and strength and love to all of you who participated on this webinar today. May the conversation we had here today spawn many more conversations that nurture hope and joy and health for our communities and for our world. Goodbye.